He didn't rule kingdoms. He wrote the instructions for everyone who did. He never wore a crown, never led an army, never spilled blood with his own hands. And yet, few names have frightened kings and professors more than his. Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who taught the world how power really works, and lost everything because he told the truth. Imagine Florence in the late 1400s, the jewel of the Renaissance, art, music, invention, and enough political backstabbing to fill a season of Game of Thrones. While Leonardo painted and Michelangelo sculpted, Machiavelli studied people, not their faces but their motives. He was a diplomat, a bureaucrat, and a witness to chaos. One day the city adored you, the next you were hanging from the city gates. For 15 years he served the Republic, negotiating with kings and generals, surviving coups and egos. He saw what philosophers ignored. People aren't guided by virtue, but by advantage. And that became the seed of his heresy. When the powerful Medici family returned to Florence, the Republic fell. Machiavelli was accused of conspiracy, arrested, tortured. He lost his post, his fortune, his dignity, but not his curiosity. In exile, living in a small village with little more than paper and frustration, he began to write. Each evening, he put on his old government robes, sat at his desk, and imagined he was still among princes. He poured everything he had seen into one short, dangerous book, Il Principe, The Prince. It would change politics forever. The Prince wasn't a philosophy, it was a mirror, one that reflected how rulers actually behave. He wrote that a leader must learn how not to be good, that mercy, honesty, and generosity were tools, useful only when they served stability, that fear was safer than love because people betray love faster than they forget fear. It sounded monstrous, but it was also true. Machiavelli didn't invent corruption, he just described it too accurately. When the book spread across Europe, everyone was outraged. Kings condemned it in public and kept a copy in private. The church banned it, calling it the work of the devil. The word Machiavellian became an insult, synonymous with deceit, manipulation, cold-blooded calculation. But behind the scandal was a deeper idea, that politics is not a sermon, it's a survival game, and pretending otherwise is just bad strategy. Machiavelli loved metaphors. A good ruler, he said, must be a lion to scare wolves and a fox to avoid traps. Courage and cunning, strength and subtlety. He didn't praise cruelty, he praised control. If a ruler must be harsh, let it be quick, purposeful, and final. Better to be feared once than hated daily. Better to break promises than lose power. It wasn't evil, it was logic, stripped of illusion. A guide not for saints, but for survivors. Machiavelli wasn't rich, powerful, or cruel. He wrote The Prince hoping the Medici would hire him back. They didn't. He died poor, mocked by moralists, misunderstood by almost everyone. The book that should have saved him instead buried his reputation. And yet, long after his death, it became required reading for popes, generals, and CEOs. His tragedy? He taught truth to people who preferred beautiful lies. Before Machiavelli, rulers justified themselves by God. After him, they justified themselves by results. He separated ethics from politics, a dangerous surgery that modernity never quite healed. He showed that power has its own laws, that appearances matter more than intentions, that stability is worth more than honesty, and that ideals without strength are decoration. Whether you agree or not, look around. The world still runs on his logic. For centuries, priests and poets tried to exorcise his ghost. They called him the teacher of tyrants. But dictators rarely read Machiavelli carefully. They only cherry-picked him. He never said, be cruel for fun. He said, be cruel when necessary and then stop. He didn't admire tyrants, he analyzed them. He didn't teach evil. He explained why goodness alone fails in the hands of the naive. If anything, he was a realist surrounded by dreamers. And nothing scares dreamers more than reality. 500 years later, the prince sits on desks from Wall Street to the White House. Politicians quote him without naming him. Psychologists call it dark triad thinking. Marketing calls it strategy. We like to believe we've evolved, that power today is transparent, democratic, moral. But every campaign, every negotiation, every algorithm still follows his principles. Control the image, predict desire, exploit weakness, smile while doing it. Machiavelli would have loved social media. He didn't despise virtue. He just didn't trust it. He believed morality makes great men, but not necessarily great rulers. And maybe that's the question he left us with. Can you be both? Can you rule without deceiving? Can you lead without manipulation? Can you keep power without becoming its prisoner? Every leader since has tried to prove him wrong. None have succeeded. Machiavelli never said the end justifies the means. That line isn't even in his book. What he said was subtler and more haunting. People will always judge by results. That's why history forgets intentions and remembers victories. That's why failure, even with virtue, feels like sin. And that's why every empire, every company, every politician keeps his book close and quotes him without admitting it. He died in 1527, buried without honor. But 5 centuries later, his words still burn because they touch the oldest fire in humanity, the desire to control fate. Some read him as a villain, others as a teacher. In truth, he was neither. He was a witness, the only one honest enough to say aloud what everyone else was already doing in secret. He loved laughter, wine, and long debates under the Tuscan sun. He joked that fortune was a woman, and if you want to control her, you must treat her roughly. A scandalous metaphor, yes, but one that reveals his essence. He saw the world not as good or evil, but as it is. And that perhaps is why he still offends us, because we prefer comforting myths to uncomfortable truths. Look around. Politicians smile with sincerity rehearsed by PR teams. Corporations craft empathy campaigns while chasing profit. Even ordinary people curate their own public image online. It's all Machiavellian theater. He didn't invent hypocrisy. He just made it efficient. He turned the mask into an art form, and we've been perfecting it ever since. In the end, the man who never ruled anyone ended up ruling the minds of everyone. He wrote a handbook for survival and accidentally created the dictionary of ambition. If hell exists, Machiavelli probably runs the communications department, quietly editing speeches, whispering, "Don't promise what you can't deliver, promise what they want to hear." 500 years later, his truth still stands. Power isn't evil, but it always asks you to choose between what works and what's right. They burned his reputation, banned his book, cursed his name, and yet history remembers him more vividly than all his judges, because Niccolò Machiavelli did the unthinkable. He told the truth about us, and we still haven't forgiven him for it.